Sciences and Vice President CSIR to kindly come up and share the pearls of wisdom with us.
On the dais, Dr. Shastri, Professor Venugopal, Professor Ram Gopal, Dr. Venugopal, our host, Dr. Geeta, seated before me, directors of different CSIR institutions, senior members of the faculty, dear students, ladies and gentlemen. This is a historic venue where we have gathered this morning. This is a place which has seen history being made not once but more than once. And I'm glad today we are making another historic landmark. Beginning from early 1940s, this is one of the first CSIR labs to have been set up in this country. The first one being in Jammu by Sir Ramnath Chopra, and this one I think around the time of independence. And also, if you may recall, if you have forgotten, you may bring back to your memory, this is one of those CSIR labs which was personally visited during the inauguration by the then first Vice President of CSIR, none other than Dr. Sama Prasad Mukherjee. Because he was the Vice President only for about 2 years before he put in his papers. But that also is a part of history, and we do have photographs in the corridor. Also, this is something which Dr. Venugopal would have told you, but I am performing his task on his behalf. This is also the laboratory which has evolved with the evolution of independent India. So the journey of NPL coincides with the journey of independent India since 1947. And that too in more ways than once. As he told you, the old timers would recall, whenever you heard the 8 o'clock bulletin in the morning, that was the only thing available at the 9 o'clock. That beep which he was referring to is one which emanated from this place. The atomic timing with which all of us used to match our watches, much before the electronic means came in. So in other words, the journey of NPL also coincides with the journey of Akashvani, which was the name adopted after independence. Thirdly, I think the electoral history of India is deeply indebted to this. If you didn't have this lab, maybe I wouldn't have been there. The reason being that right from the very first election that we have in this country in 1952, it was this lab which was providing that ink and saving many of us from bogus voting or helping others to indulge in the same. So you can understand how deeply embedded is this institution with the history of independence, the journey of post-independent India, the evolution of Akashvani and the news methodologies in this country, as well as the growth of electoral mechanism over the last 7 decades. And therefore, now why I'm saying all this is that this is precisely which prompted me to think of this. Not now, because incidentally I didn't have the mandate then, but about many years back, about 15 years back or about 10 years back, I was sitting with some of the friends from the tourism department. I said, what all about is that is done by you? He said, we promote tourism. We guide the foreigners to places where they ought to go. I said, no, because I am a Khurafati researcher like many of us. So I said, can you just tell me some of those places? Then he looked back at me with certain amount of disdain and contempt, as if I was trying to be over smart. So I said, do you permit me to tell? He said, okay, go ahead. I said, anybody coming to Delhi will spare 2 hours, 3 hours to go to Agra to get a photograph on the Diana bench, which I need not tell, you need not tell. Right from the day he begins his journey from the United States, he has to make a visit to Taj Mahal, seated himself, along with his spouse or maybe anyone else on that bench. No, I just mean that. Not more than that, because the youngsters are having a laugh. And get a photograph. Then when the same tourist or the group of tourists arrives in Delhi, you don't have to tell him to visit Red Fort. That he knows. Because so imposing is that red stone monument. Then you don't also have to often tell him about Jantar Mantar, because there's so many stories hanging after that the earlier times, this is how the time was detected when there were no other means, etc., etc. Then maybe a foreigner will also like to visit Qutub Minar, particularly if he happens to be France, a French tourist, just to make sure that it is not taller than the Eiffel Tower. So I said, then what else is what you guide for? And so much of resource, because I was luckily not part of the government that time, so you have all these liberties. I said the active role or a contribution of any tourist guide or a tourist department or tourist agency is to acquaint people with the monuments of modern India. One of which is this, and I actually quoted this as an example. And they looked back quite blankly about what I was talking about. I think many of those friends were not even aware of what NPL meant or what it spelled out. So I told them, we have National Physical Laboratory over here. We have some of the institutes which have already, we have, for example, the IIPA's, Indian Institute of Public Administration, which was born just after 4 years after independence in 1950-51, one of the earliest institutes of administration. Of course, the other institutes came a little later, but just within the 5 years, we had some of the initiating monuments, which actually became a model for the other monuments to be brought up. And therefore, soon after this, government came in 2014, because I didn't have any access to them, nor the mandate to suggest them, because that was not part of my portfolio, but I had the Department of Atomic Energy. So I told the friends there that there are only 2 departments in Government of India, which incidentally do not have their headquarters in the national capital. And for legacy reasons, nobody asks, not even in Crorepati, is this ever a question asked. I think this is a question which should fetch 1 crore. If the national capital of India is Delhi, why not headquarter of atomic energy in Delhi? If the national capital of India is Delhi, why not headquarter of Space Department in Delhi? Many of us think this is irrelevant talk. And that's because the eyes see what the mind knows. And you have to, if you have seen and the mind knows, then you can share with others. We had to set up the Department of Atomic Energy because the entire setup was done by Homi Bhabha in Bombay. And he started off just before independence actually. He had just come on a holiday and the World War started. He had to go back, he was on a leave. He could not, because all the transport was suspended. Most of the transport those days happened through ship, the sea route. It got suspended for 3-4 years as long as and the World War lasted till 1944. So he couldn't go back. Meanwhile, he started all this. And then soon after the independence happened. And that gave a boost and supplementation to whatever he was doing. So by legacy, it got headquartered there. Similarly, Sarabhai was attending a conference in Trivandrum. Suddenly he passed away in the middle of night. There was chaos the next morning. Nobody knew who would take over the Department of Space. ISRO had just been set up. So the only other person they could think of is the other person who had actually started the journey along with him was Professor Satish Dhawan. But Professor Satish Dhawan was so deeply rooted and settled in Bangalore that he could not left it. He had thesis projects, he had students, because he was into full-time work. He did not know that he would have to take over. So the department had to be set up in Bangalore. So what I did was that we set up in Pragati Maidan a hall of nuclear power. I'm saying so because I'm sure in this room nobody would have visited that. That has existed there for the last about 10 years, soon after this government came in. Sometimes we encourage the students to go there. It's beautiful, it's worth seeing. I mean, they have just personified how the nuclear energy develops, how the ultraviolet rays comes, how does it emanate, and there is also computerized question answer section there. So we set up a pavilion there. I suggested to Department of Space, we could be setting up the same there also. So thereafter, when I came to this department, I thought we could actually celebrate not only what we have done, but also make others aware for the reason that they are the stakeholders. After all, what are we working for? So this 1 week, one lab is actually meant to serve more than one purposes. A, to have your own esteem. Because if you are left isolated, you tend to lose your own esteem. You don't even like to shave in the morning. Recently, Hopkins started a project, appearance project for scientists. So that when you get up in the morning, make sure that you appear good. Otherwise, many of them would think nobody is going to visit my lab, nobody is going to come here. How much difference does it make whether I go there bathed, unbathed, odorful or odorless? And actually, they started a project. But why do we have to come to that pass? So A, it gives us esteem. B, our stakeholders. As he was saying, Geeta was also saying, the students, the stakeholders, the industry, they don't know. And being students of science, we've been taught to speak not without evidence. And I can quote you so many examples out of the 37 labs. These labs or institutes are not even introduced to the similar institutes in their own vicinity of 4-kilometer radius. I think the simplest example is that we were sitting in IIIM Jammu, and as Professor Ram Gopal and Dr. Inaugural also said, each of these, I think Inaugural was saying, each of these labs is dedicated to a separate specialty or separate stream of work, which itself is a uniqueness. In this era of specialization, super specialization, now we are moving into sub-super specialization. You know, even in medicine, like the other days, Sadhguruji of Bangalore was telling me he had gone to Australia, he hurt his knee, so he told the hotel management, I need a doctor. He says, after 10 minutes, I received a call. They asked me, what is wrong with your knee? I narrated the story. Then they further started asking me. The lady kept on questioning me. He says, I got fed up and I told her, ma'am, in any case, the doctor is going to come. So why are you putting me to all this? She said, no, I have to determine what kind of orthopedic surgeon do you need. We have a separate orthopedic surgeon for trauma, a separate one for arthritis, separate one for nodular disease. So he says, I got so irritated. I said, now will you ask me which knee, left or right? But there is so much of knowledge explosion happening, and the doubling time, as we say in science, doubling time is the time when our textbook requires a fresh edition. Is also narrowing down. The volume of knowledge is increasing. The volume, and we, luckily, our founding fathers had this vision to set up each of these institutes dedicated to a separate stream, which again we are not being able to publicize enough. And the working in isolation, I was referring to the example of IIIM, I was sitting there and Dr. Reddy was telling me that we have an ambitious project because that lab is dedicated to drugs. It's the oldest drug research laboratory in India. So he said, we are working on an ambitious project of multi-drug resistant tuberculosis. And I got him a project for cannabis before I was a minister here, through my own efforts, because that was part of my diabetes profession. We had a lot of diabetic, painful neuropathies. So we got a project of cannabis cultivation. We had to get approvals from the government and a French collaboration. So he said, there are two. Incidentally, it occurred to me that just 3 kilometers away was a postgraduate medical institute, a government postgraduate medical institute. And I said, have you got in touch with him? No, we are not known to each other. So I sat there, made it a point to call the dean from there, who happened to be a lady. She was kind enough because we were calling at a short notice. So I said, no, because I may not get an opportunity like this. So she took over an hour to come, so I kept sitting. Then I suggested, I said, why can't we have a thesis? You have postgraduate students. Now for this drug resist, which is being trials going on tuberculosis, can't you have a thesis in pharmacology? You have MD pharmacology. UGC guidelines say that the main guide has to be from the parent institution. The co-guide can be other. So I said, you have your professor as the guide. Let one of our senior scientists here be the co-guide, so that your boys, our boys, have an exposure to also move among the patients on whom they are actually going to ultimately use the drug. And I was told recently, I asked, and they were told that they have now actually planned that. Or similarly, even in medicine department, we have postgraduates, we have thesis, we have post-scholars there. So that is the magic, the advantage of integration. Similarly, in the Nagpur lab also, we hardly integrate even with those institutes which are doing a like-minded work. Whereas the need of the hour is to have an extended integration even with the industry. Like, for example, you have some of the best labs, or one or two, you have the National Chemical Laboratory in Pune. At the same time, we have a huge pharma industry in Pune, so also in Ahmedabad. I was talking of the multi-drug resistance incidentally, whereas the medical institute is 3 kilometers away, about 10 kilometers away is the Sun Pharma factory. So if you are actually going to now, through this Yuva portal, the idea is to connect, to identify the potential young boys and girls who could be startups, who could carry forward the torch. But how would you sustain them unless you engage the industry? And therefore, I think the idea is that every week, I'm glad that it has taken off quite well. It was being quite appreciably discussed the other day, even when I was in Hyderabad, because that laboratory also was observing that time. And there was some confusion in the beginning. We started receiving calls. Whom to call governor, to call vice president, to call chief minister, or to call which minister? So I had to tell them, no, we have to call ourselves. We are celebrating ourselves. We are celebrating our work. We are trying to realize the worth of our work, the reach of our work, and all those who are connected to our work, so that we can give extended life to our work. And therefore, these boys and girls are the ministers, the governors, and the chief ministers. So the initial two programs, it took us time, because they thought maybe another Sarkari program has been launched, as usually the ministers do. But the problem with me is that I go as chief guest, come back delivering a keynote address. Well, that is what I did for more than a quarter of a century. So this is the idea, is that when we propagate ourselves, and we do so not only through these programs, we use social media, which is the most common, we at least make people aware of what is happening here, so that they would come here not for us, but for their own reasons. The huge startup boom in this country, we are now number 3 ecosystem. And to sustain the startups, you need aptitude. So how to identify? Very often we are providing support to those who reach us. They know where is the office of the Technology Development Board, they know where is the office of BIRAC, they have nothing else to do for the next 6 months. They take up a project. But are we reaching out to the one? So that is, I think, one huge challenge. So portal like this can enable us to reach out to those, A, who has aptitude, then to sustain, B, you have to connect him or her with an attractive source of livelihood. Because after all, that boy or girl they are the children of the same society. So he cannot tolerate for long his counterpart moving in a car and he carrying launcher on the carrier of his bicycle, which Zarabai did in those days, but won't happen now. So B is that. And third is to connect him with the industry. We could even do the industry mapping. And I'm glad that Dr. Inaugural was talking about the skill part of it. And of course, essentially startup is skill, innovation, creativity. And most of all, we are going to launch another program very shortly. I have some ideas in mind to do a follow-up of the startups. I mean, it sounds a little unpleasant, also a little rude. Because अब मुझे support दिया तो you are going to follow me up? Yes. We have a count of startups. We don't have the count of who actually ended up as startups. How many have, and that could be an education for us. So in the next meeting that we have a combined scientific departments meeting that we have started the process only this year. I have requested a presentation. We have certain models. One of the models emanated from America, where they actually make phone calls to the startups or reach out for them physically every year to see what they are doing. So if we are able to do that, we would not only be able to improve upon ourselves, but also able to. And third, I think what we have started today, the first ever lab in Karnal, is a huge, huge message that we are providing a level playing field. And that is directly connected with aptitude. Aptitude may not be correlative. You cannot correlate it with your physical attributes. A person who is physically challenged or physically blessed may be having greater aptitude. Like Wordsworth says, there is a man who walks through the world with the eyes open and the other one who walks with the eyes closed. But both are blessed with the eyes. They are not the Divyangs. So we will give preference to aptitudes, to the caliber, to the capacity, to the inherent urge, rather to the physical attributes. That's also the message which has gone loud and clear from the platform of CSIR today. I once again congratulate you. I think this Yuva portal will help us to connect, to identify the potential student startups, young startups, and also very soon when we develop a mechanism to follow them up, we'll be able to do them house handling, home handling, or hand holding even in midway, because I've seen many of the women startups dropping out for reasons of wedding. But if one of us comes to know, you could at least come to their rescue and find an option. We had a scientist in Bhopal lab, she dropped out because she got married to an IAS officer. So I don't know which is better, an IAS or scientist, that is for you to decide. But nevertheless, so we will not have, we may contribute in preventing such casualties happening. These are casualties happening to the scientific fraternity if we are able to follow up. And this is one step towards that. The Yuva Porta and the level playing field to pick up the aptitudes is our Karnal initiative. So all the very best, and I'm sure this is going to, at the end of the day, benefit each one of us who have a stake in this. Thank you.